All right.
Thank you. Again, you're raising very, very good questions. Benzene, we already discussed, is a known human carcinogen. Dioxin, the evidence is mixed. It's an animal carcinogen, but we treat it as if it causes cancer in humans as well. So we treat it as a human carcinogen. Polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, PAHs as we know them, very common byproducts of combustion, and they cause cancer in animals, and they are likely human carcinogens as well. Now, when I was talking about cumulative impacts, we do have some tools, and when we look at multiple carcinogens, I mean, it's not terribly sophisticated, but at a minimum, we can add up the cancers, risk from each of these chemicals, and that's typically what we would do. So, when I was down in VI, and I reported out on the results of the air sampling, and we were focused on a handful of cancer-causing chemicals, benzene first and foremost, and the benzene levels were low. I mean, not absent, but they were low, and they were associated, and I know it's maybe it's a hard pill to swallow to say an acceptable cancer risk, but we do have what we call acceptable cancer risks ranges right here, as part of our laws, because the way we assess carcinogens is such that any exposure can cause some measurable, some theoretical increase in cancer risk. So literally, if you were exposed to one molecule of benzene, I would say, well, I could probably calculate your cancer risk. It might be one in a trillion, but it's some calculable number. So when we talk about cancer, we have to talk about what's unacceptable and what's acceptable. And generally, we use a threshold of one excess cancer case in 10,000 to define unacceptable risk. And of course, if you're that 1 in 10,000, that doesn't sound very acceptable. But I would like just to put it in a little perspective, because you yourself stated, because cancer is a very complex disease, and it's caused by many, many factors. And the science actually points to lifestyle factors as contributing the lion's share of the cancer that's in our society, which is very high, 25% at least, in through almost every society. Is it higher on VI? Well, you raise a good point. You don't know because you don't have a cancer registry. And so that's something that hopefully some of our sister agencies like ATSDR could conceivably assist with. But I just want to make the point that when we assess cancer, if we deem it unacceptable if it's more than 1 in 10,000. Now, if you were to look at, just a sample population of 2,000 people, no matter where they are, here or down in St. Croix, and if you track those 10,000 people over their lifetime, you're reasonably going to expect about 2,500 cancer cases. About 25% of the population gets cancer. And again, it's lifestyle factors that are causing the overwhelming majority of it. Smoking, without a doubt, heavy alcohol consumption, excess exposure to the sun, high-fat, low-fiber diets. That's all very well established. And so what EPA is saying, though, is if you took that sample population of 10,000 and exposed them to whatever was coming out of Hovenza, and if their cancer rate increased by one additional case in 10,000, in effect from 2,500 to 2,501, one extra case in 10,000, we would deem that unacceptable. So, again, as I said, I think that's a pretty stringent standard for us to live under. So I breathe easy knowing that. Now, again, that's put into regulations. What we are able to do is look at, when you have multiple carcinogens like dioxin, benzene, PAHs, we could add those up. So if the benzene itself isn't 1 in 10,000, but when you add all the other ones, if it comes to greater than 1 in 10,000, yes, we would take an action. So we have a way of getting, to some extent, cumulative effects. Now, is it perfect? It's not, because that's what we would call an additive impact. We're just adding up the cancers from each individual carcinogen. Maybe they act what we call synergistically. That, when you put the two together, it's not 2 plus 2 equals 4. It could be 2 plus 2 equals 6 or 7. And there is some evidence that some chemicals actually do work that way. But again, the science is just not that far along that I can tell you that if you was exposed to benzene, dioxin, and PAHs, that you might have something more than an additive cancer risk effect. But when we were down in BI, the bottom line was the cancer risk from the contaminants we measured. And again, it wasn't exhaustive, but it was the ones that we thought were the most of the greatest concern. And again, benzene certainly amongst them. The cancer risk was in the acceptable risk range. So I know that's not going to give you a great sense of solace, if you will, but I'm reporting on the science as best I understand it.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thank you. Feel like you have any questions?
No, I would expect for him to base what he's saying and try and I am saying what I am saying because I have to see as our community, the only thing that is growing is the cemetery.
Yeah.
That's the fastest growing community is the cemetery. So again, I am saying that something is wrong. I hear what you're saying, and one of the reasons why you yourself cannot come to the conclusion whether we have a cancer problem or not is because there's no cancer registry. And I think if EPA needs that to come to a conclusion, I think that is one of the enforcement. The federal government gives money to the local government every year, and I think that in order for you guys to better do your job, if you're going to realize if we have an epidemic here or not, we would need to know how many people are dying from cancer, and because there is no registry here, I think you cannot come to the conclusion whether or not we have a problem or not until we have a cancer registry. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks. I'm gonna move to startups, upsets, malfunctions, and shutdowns. Now, before I even get into that, I have one question to ask you, and then based on what you tell me, then I'll move forward. I asked the question, how many samplings, or what you guys call VOCs, have been done here in the Virgin Islands? And someone wrote back and stated that in 2011, that was the only time VOCs were conducted. My question to you, is that acceptable to EPA?
Yeah, our air program had to leave right at 3 o'clock, unfortunately, while Mark was talking. I don't know if we have anybody left in the room that can answer your specific question.
There's some work being done nationally on including startup shutdown malfunction provisions or excluding startup shutdown provisions from state implementation plans. I don't know, and as you just told, the air program people had to leave. I'm not sure whether any are in the Virgin Islands SIP. But where there are provisions that allow for emissions at startup and shutdown, they're undergoing change. Not just in the VI, but nationally, there will be changes to the regulations, in part due to a recent Supreme Court case on the subject, where the court opined that any emissions were unacceptable, and so the regulations throughout the country are changing as a result, and we're in flux right now.
Okay, let me see if I could clarify something with Feli. So before I move forward, VOCs, Feli, they call, if I'm correct, I have so much stuff in my head right now that I can't remember what VOC stand for. I think it's volatile something. What is it? Volatile what?
Also, volatile organic compounds.
Yeah, volatile organic compounds. what is going on. Like when, say, for example, the fire that took place in 2001. What should have happened is that, and each time it has a fire, so you know that was not the first fire that we ever had in Hovensa. What should have happened is that immediately DPNR goes out, takes samples at the sampling sites or the monitoring sites to see how high the emissions were. Now, what EPA is telling me is that the VOC was only done in 2001. What does that tell you? That no other sampling in that nature, even though we had fires prior, was ever done prior to 2011. To me, that is unacceptable. So now we don't even have a guideline. Like how DPNR is saying they don't have a baseline to actually determine toxics in the pollution in the water. They can't even say whether the last fire was worse than the fire in 2011 because they never did any sampling whatsoever. So my thing is, if EPA is monitoring us as a country or as a territory, one of the things, if I was working at EPA, that would stick out to me like a sore thumb is I'm expecting some sampling if I ever heard that the refinery had a fire. Now, my next question that went unanswered that I would like to know, and then I'll wrap this up on my end, is how soon should sampling occur when there has been an upset or a fire at the facility?
Jeff, did you provide an answer to that previously or not?
I'm trying to remember the date on 2011. I was the lead OSC for the Capeco fire, so I could give you a little bit of the lessons learned for that. And obviously, this may or may not be completely 100% applicable to Hovensa, especially now since they're in terminal storage operation. But what I can tell you about Capeco is that resources available will dictate a little bit how soon you can get sampling done. Depending on what's ablaze, what's burning, you have a pretty good idea going in as to what's being emitted. But until you get the resources on the ground to do sampling, and believe me, we did extensive sampling for both particulates, VOCs, and everything like that with the Capeco fire because we had substantial, I mean, just in Levittown alone, we're talking 60,000 people that were in a very close radius of that particular fire. So it really is going to depend a lot on the situation and how soon we can get them there. We'll obviously we rely a lot on first responders, whatever equipment's available with either the fire departments, DPNR, or local resources. If it's in Sitco, I even had some equipment. But, health and safety of those particular first responders and what equipment they can bring to bear and resources like that really is going to depend on how quickly we can marshal the resources. With the understanding that any response like that, it's probably going to end up being a unified command where you have fire department, worried about certain things. And, you have the police department worried about security. You have DPNR worried about the environment. EPA worried about the environment. So all of those agencies will come together and come up with, okay, what's our goal in terms of protecting human health, human life, and the environment. So it's always fluid, so there is no set answer, unfortunately. I hope that gives you a quick indication of more or less what would be involved.
Okay, well, maybe I need to give you some more information. I think the fire occurred. I need to confirm. Do you know the last fire, what date that occurred on? What date was the fire at Hovensa that did the reason why they did the study?
I do not. I've been responding to Hovensa in my on-scene coordinator capacity when they've had upsets and we've received reports. And but I am not aware, unless somebody on the call is aware of when the last fire was. No.
Could I say something, please?
Go ahead.
Hello?
Go ahead, Philo.
Yeah, someone just referred to Hovensa as a storage facility. I'd like to correct that, please. The governor has no authority to enter into agreement without putting that agreement before the legislature. Because that agreement has not